Hello, Amanda.
Hi, Olivia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. How's your social distancing going?
It's going great. Social distancing is great for someone as introverted as I am.
I feel the same exact way.
Yeah, and the weather is nice. So,
Yeah, I'm currently just sitting here looking outside at the weather.
yeah, wishing I was outside in the weather.
Yeah, I was out a little bit earlier and I have a small sunburn already.
Ooh, I got a sunburn like a week ago. It was a bad sunburn.
It was cloudy and overcast.
Yeah, well, it was cloudy. You know, you get the worst sunburns when it's cloudy.
I know. Gotta wear that sunscreen.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we are here with podcast number 2. We made it.
Yes, episode 2 of the Safe Passage podcast.
This month, or this podcast number 2, we are going to talk about consent and sexual assault. April, if you follow us along on social media, it is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. We had a lot of good tips and tools online and how you can support and what consent looks like. So hopefully you followed along with that. We thought we'd hop on and follow up on that and talk a little bit more about consent and sexual assault.
Yes. So, just as a little bit of a content warning, if you haven't already guessed, we are going to be talking about sexual assault, sexual violence, some of the different types of sexual violence. So, if that's a sensitive topic for you, do what you need to do to take care of yourself. If that's not listening, if that's practicing some really good self care afterward, or listening with someone who's safe for you, or whatever that looks like for you, just take all the necessary precautions to keep yourself well and safe.
Yeah, exactly. And if it comes to a point where you think maybe I need to talk to somebody, advocates are available 24/7. So we're here if you want to talk about anything. You can always give us a call, a text, an email.
Yeah, we are here 24/7 all the time.
So today when we talk about sexual assault, we're going to use the definition that is any unwanted or non-consensual sexual behavior or sexual contact.
Mm-hmm. So I think that one of the first things we often think of when we hear those definitions is rape, which is definitely is included in sexual assault. It can also include a lot of other things, like any unwanted physical contact or any unwanted touching, unwanted language or comments, maybe like spying or sharing images non-consensually. All those different types of behaviors can be included in what we're just talking about as sexual assault today. So we're kind of using a very broad definition.
And one of the most important reasons why we're talking about it today is because we know, statistically speaking, 1 in 6 American women and 1 in 33 American men have experienced rape or attempted rape in their lifetime. And we use the statistic from the RAINN network. So if you wanted to look that up, it's RAINN, and that's the RAINN network that has a lot of sexual assault specific information on their website.
Yeah. I think they're kind of like the national like sexual assault resource center and like network
Mm-hmm.
in our country. So, as we are kind of going into this discussion of sexual assault, we kind of want to start off with talking about consent and what consent looks like, and kind of build on that foundation because we know that consent is incredibly important. It's a very normal, very necessary, and very safe part of sex. And so, we want to just kind of like unpack it a little bit and talk about what it looks like and what it is.
The first part of consent that we're going to look at is if the participants are old enough. So in the state of Idaho, the consent law is 18. So you have to be 18 to consent to sex in Idaho. But there are age considerations. Those age considerations are 16 and 17, but it has to fall within a 3-year age gap above. So a 16-year-old couldn't have sex with a 15-year-old because they don't fall within the 16 and 17 age consideration range. This is going to include any sexual behavior activity, and there might be a chance of getting in legal trouble. So sometimes when we hear the term statutory rape, that's where that age and consent is going to come into.
Yeah. So that's specifically Idaho's law, Idaho's age of consent law. Laws are a little bit different in different states. So if something happened in like Washington or in Montana or some other state, the laws are probably going to look a little bit different, but that's Idaho's age of consent law specifically.
The second part of consent we're going to look at is if the participants have full capacity or ability to consent.
Yeah. So some things that can maybe impact someone's capacity or ability could be being affected by substances such as drugs or alcohol, especially if it's to the level where it's impacting somebody's decision making. That can really impact their ability to kind of clearly and freely make that decision if they've got a lot of substances or things that are impacting their decision making processes in their brain.
Mm-hmm. Another would be maybe a person with a certain mental disability or intellectual disability. They might not be able to have the capacity to consent and fully understand what they're consenting to.
Anytime we have any threats or pressure involved, especially if there is any type of physical violence or any weapons or threats to someone's safety, that takes away someone's ability to freely give consent because they're feeling that pressure, they're feeling that fear, they're feeling like they have to say yes. So, anytime there's any type of pressure or threats, that really takes away their ability to freely give consent.
Along those lines would be maybe any manipulation or pressure, guilt tripping somebody, wearing them down that they finally are like, okay, fine, begging them. This isn't something that somebody's giving their free will of consent for. So we kind of look at that as not being able to give a full consent to something if you're consistently being worn down to engage in sexual activities with your partner.
And, in order to fully give an informed free consent, you've got to kind of be aware of, what all you're consenting to. So things like lying about maybe like protection or birth control or STIs or things like that kind of takes away that ability to really like know exactly what someone is consenting to. So that can kind of impact that knowledge and that informed consent as well.
Also, when you look at a power dynamic, maybe it's in a job or like your workspace, it's in a school setting, it's in a whatever setting it is, that there's a power dynamic between the two people. It might make somebody uncomfortable to say no. Maybe there's a thought that maybe they would lose something if they say no, or there's things dingling over their heads where if they say no, they could lose opportunities. So that power dynamic is super important when somebody's giving the opportunity to give consent.
The third thing that we need to look at when we're looking at consent and whether consent is present is whether or not the participants agreed to take part.
Yeah, it's important that both parties communicate so they're on the same page. If they're not communicating, it's so much harder to know if consent is present or not. If someone's not sure if consent is present, they should probably stop what they're doing and check in. And I think the check in part is the most important thing you can do with a partner, making sure that you're both on the same page, wanting to go the same places and do the same things together. So just a small check in is super easy.
And I think it's also good practice to have conversations about consent before the situation even arises. It's usually about getting more than just a yes or a no answer. It often is also going to involve a lot of conversations around like likes and dislikes, preferences, using protection, what people are comfortable with as far as that goes, maybe previous experiences or any specific boundaries that people feel more comfortable with. And so just being able to like sit down and have those conversations in a very safe and like no judgment way
Mm-hmm.
before the situation like even comes up is going to be so much more helpful so that both people have had that conversation and they know they're on the same page or not.
Exactly. And it should be enthusiastic, right? When you and your partner are together and someone's like, do you want to have sex? And someone's like, I guess, or only if you want to. It doesn't really sound or probably wouldn't feel like that person was giving consent in an enthusiastic way that they wanted to partake in whatever that was going on.
Yeah. Kind of similarly, like we know that consent is reversible too. So if somebody consents to do something one time, it doesn't mean they've consented to do that thing forever. It's not like oh, what you said it once, so that's the way it is now forever. That's not the way it works. They have the right to change their mind or say, no, I don't want to do that anymore. Let's not do that again. Or, whatever. They can take the things that they say back.
Yeah, like this isn't fun. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
I think the next thing that we want to talk about is misconceptions when it comes to sexual assault and myths around sexual assault. I think in society there are a ton of them. If you have any more that you can think of and want to talk about, let us know. But we're going to just go over a couple that we kind of hear and we have heard people say. So we're going to try to go over those and talk about the realities of those.
Yeah. So our first myth is that it's not sexual assault if the survivor didn't fight back or protest or resist what's happened in some way.
Yeah. And I mean, in the reality of that, there's a lot of reasons someone might not fight back or protest. I think the number one would be a safety concern. If I'm fighting back and the violence is escalating, that might not make somebody want to use any force to fight back because that violence is escalating. They might be manipulated into participating. They might fear for their job or reputation if they say no. Many survivors experience something we call tonic immobility, which is a part of the brain's fight, flight, freeze response. And it's common when something traumatic happens. So, this is the way that your brain kind of shuts down and goes into survival mode. And it makes them physically unable to move or to talk at that moment. It's like we use the analogy like playing possum. So, like in the wild, wherever possums are in the wild, I guess, if they are afraid of their safety, they'll act like they died so that the predator would leave them alone. So, we kind of correlate that together to make it a little bit more understanding because the brain in reality is just trying to make you survive this experience altogether. Another part of that is the natural body responses to things that happen. So, a lot of times, if there's something that happens while a sexual assault is going on, a lot of people get confused of a natural body response to sexual things that are happening to them. And that correlates to, well, if my body reacts this way, but I didn't want it, it's a very confusing process. But we know that the body naturally reacts to things that are happening. Like if I'm sitting here cutting an onion and my eyes start to water, I'm not sad the onion's getting cut. It's just my natural body response to that.
Yeah, definitely.
The next myth we have is sexual assault or sexual violence is a women's issue.
Yeah. So I think kind of the perception that, it's an issue that only women really deal with. It's an issue that is women's responsibility to deal with and stand up for and end and all of those things, which isn't necessarily the case. It is true that statistically women do experience sexual assault more frequently than men. That's true. But we also know that it does happen to men as well. It's not talked about a whole lot, and I think sometimes that can make men feel more shame, or maybe make their community look down on them if they do choose to come forward. And so that can
Mhm.
be a pretty significant barrier for men choosing to come forward. And we also know that people who are LGBTQ, people who maybe identify with a gender other than male or female, or who are transgender, things like that, they also experience very, very high rates of sexual violence. And so that's something that we also want to be aware of, that it's not necessarily just women only issue. It's a lot of different people deal with it. A lot of different people experience it. And the other part of that too is, even though it does statistically happen to men less, it's very, very important that everybody works together to end sexual violence. So everyone's voices are super important in that, including men's voices. And it's something that we need everybody to be on board for, right?
Exactly. If we want to decrease the level of violence, we need everybody to take part.
Yeah. Our next myth says that if the survivor was perceived as leading someone on, then they're partly to blame for the assault.
Yeah. And I mean, in reality, it's never the survivor's fault, especially around anything, especially around violence. Doesn't matter the clothes someone's wearing, if they've slept with the person before, if they're dating or have dated. It doesn't negate their ability to give or not give consent. In reality, sexual assault is the choice of the person who assaulted them. Our last myth is false reports of sexual assault just to get someone in legal trouble or for revenge is a big issue.
Right. So I know this is kind of it's a big topic. A lot of people bring it up. It's kind of a common myth that we hear. But we know that the vast majority of sexual assaults that happen, 2/3 of sexual assaults that happen, never get reported to law enforcement for a lot of reasons. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But a lot of them are never reported. And we also know that out of 1,000 sexual assaults that happen, 995, the perpetrators face no felony or conviction or incarceration. And so that's information that we also got from the RAIN network that we mentioned earlier. So, of the percentage that are reported, very few of those end up being false reports. False sexual assault reporting happens at about the same rate as any other crime,
Mm-hmm.
and that rate's really quite low. It's around 2%. So it doesn't happen a lot. It's rarely reported, and when it is, it's even more rarely falsely reported. Yeah, and so we know that of those that are reported, not many perpetrators ever actually face those legal consequences. So, obviously, in situations, if somebody did report a sexual assault falsely just to get someone in trouble, like that's problematic, and we don't stand by that. Like, that's not
Mm-mm.
something that should happen. But we do know that it doesn't happen often. It's not a common issue, it's not a common thing that happens.
Mm-hmm. Switching gears just a bit, we're going to talk about perpetrators. We see the majority of perpetrators being somebody that somebody knows, an acquaintance. Coming from the RAIN network again, we see that 8 out of 10 assaults are committed by someone the survivor knows, usually either a current or former partner or an acquaintance. The relationship between the survivor and perpetrator might make it easier to use the manipulation or coercion and might make the survivor less likely to report to law enforcement.
Yeah, so kind of like we mentioned, we are going to look a little bit at more reasons that people don't report to the police or law enforcement. We hear a lot of reasons. One of those is, maybe people had experiences that somebody didn't believe them or assumed that they were at fault. Maybe they, tried to tell someone who didn't really entirely believe them. Maybe they have a perception that people won't believe them just based on like the people that they know and the community that they are a part of. They kind of just assume that they won't be believed. But for whatever reason, maybe they haven't been believed or they don't think people will believe them.
Mm-hmm. Or somehow, like, they could have put themselves in a different situation and blame themselves for being wherever, and they take a lot of blame on themselves.
Hmm.
Also, talking about this sexual assault that happened is going to be a really hard thing. They're going to have to go into details and tell multiple people multiple times. Usually, not a ton of people that they know. Law enforcement, maybe medical, maybe it goes to trial. So it can be a hard process, and somebody might not want to go through that.
Yeah, it's tough because it's often a very personal story and
Mm-hmm.
they just don't want to tell strangers about it.
Mm-hmm.
They might also have some type of relationship with that person. We talked a minute ago about, perpetrators, the majority of them being somebody that they know. So they might have feelings for that person. They might love them. They might not want to get that person in trouble. They might rely on that person, especially if it's a partner. They might rely on them for support or for resources or things like that. And so they don't want to have to go through a whole process that gets that person in trouble.
Mm-hmm. A big one that we hear is fear of retaliation on them, or maybe somebody that they know or they love, or maybe somebody's threatening to damage their reputation. That fear component is a big one of why people choose not to report these things.
Another common one is they may have had a history of sexual abuse or negative experiences surrounding sexual assault in the past. Maybe in the past they had a similar experience and they tried reporting or they tried telling someone, and the outcome wasn't quite what they had expected or quite what they wanted. And so they just don't want to go through that whole process again. Or maybe having experienced it before, they kind of minimize it in their mind and think, like, oh, well, I've dealt with this before. I can just kind of get over it myself, or, kind of whatever feelings they're having around that might be impacted by a previous experience.
When we talk to survivors about getting medical exams and collecting DNA and evidence, talking about the rape kit and what that looks like and how invasive it could be, and it could be uncomfortable. Sometimes people don't want to go through that and they don't want to get that, and that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. They might also just kind of minimize what happened, sort of brush it to the side, or just kind of think, oh, it's not that big a deal. It doesn't really affect me. I'm going to get over it. Just kind of not paying a lot of attention to like what actually happened.
And I think maybe people finding out if you report to law enforcement, it goes into the criminal justice system. Maybe there might feel like they'll have shame from their peers, their friends, or their family. And that's another reason why somebody might choose not to report something because they don't want them to find out.
Definitely. And if they're a part of a marginalized group of some type, they probably are going to have a lot more reporting barriers in place already. Maybe less likely to be believed, maybe, more fear of systems or law enforcement if they've had maybe negative experiences with systems in the past,
Mm-hmm.
or less access to helpful information, less access to resources. Maybe they, don't know, is this agency or is this person going to be understanding of like my specific unique situation, and
Mm-hmm.
things like that.
But there are some things that Safe Passage can do to help. And I think it's always important to give out some tangibles of what we can do and what you can do. Here at Safe Passage, we respond to sexual assault cases at Kootenai Health 24/7. And we're able to talk with somebody in our office or over the phone, text, or email. We can meet with students at their high school, middle school, on the college campuses as well.
Yeah, at least when the schools are open. When we're
Yeah.
not social distancing, we can meet students at their schools. So we have a couple different things that we can do during those meetings. We can help survivors kind of weigh their reporting options, their legal options, their medical options. I think one thing that often happens is it all feels very overwhelming, and
Mm-hmm.
people just don't necessarily know what all their options are or how to find out what they are. So we can just kind of help explain those and just kind of help them sort through some of those pros and cons of all the different options available to them.
Yeah. And I mean, I think most importantly is survivor safety. So making sure that they're going to be safe where they're staying. If they're not safe in their homes, finding them a safe place to go is also a super important thing that we can talk about of what safety looks like for them and if we need to come up with other options.
hmm if they do choose to go to the hospital and get like a sexual assault examination or anything like that, we can help them fill out paperwork or fill out paperwork for them that we can send in, and then they don't have to pay for that visit out of their own pocket.
We can also support them if they want to make a report to law enforcement. So if somebody has experienced a sexual assault and they want to report, we can sit through that reporting process with them. And we're also able to go to court with them during the criminal justice.
Yeah. We also want to make sure that they are set up to do well emotionally and mentally after the fact, too. So we can get them set up with trauma informed free counseling at our office, or refer them to other counseling services if that's something that they want. So we really want to make sure that they're set up well to kind of recover and heal and kind of build their resiliency skills, so we can get them set up with that counseling to kind of help with that process, too.
We provide education to schools and community members about consent, how to make sure it's present, and what we can do as bystanders. So, if this is something that you could utilize in your workspace, at your school, in your community of people, let us know and we can definitely set something up. Even if it's online over Zoom, we can definitely do that.
hmm And last but not least, our Children's Advocacy Center, or CAC, also plays a really important role, specifically in cases of child sexual abuse. child abuse in general, from like interviews and investigation, and also providing the non-offending caregivers or parents with resources, counseling, and other resources that they need to stay safe and do well.
I think it was really important to us when we started this podcast to make sure that the people listening had tangible tools to leave with. So they're able to use them in their own lives, be able to give information to other people. So we're going to give you some tangible tools of how you can help and what you can do. So if someone comes to you with their story, always start by believing, then offer to help them in whatever way they need. And that's the most important part of that. That's going to be about what they need. We might think we know what they need, but asking them what they need is the most important part of that. You can also help them find resources and take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm. And even before people come to you with your story, you can always make sure that those people who are in your lives know that you are a safe person to talk to no matter what. You're someone who's going to believe them. You're someone who's not going to be super judgmental or try to blame them for things, but that you're a safe person for them to come to and for them to talk to.
I think it's important that we kind of get away from making jokes about sexual assault or jokes that are sexist. I always am like, are there no other jokes that we can tell? These are the only ones out there. I think it's important that when you notice that these jokes are happening, even if it's in the media, around your friends, you can call it out or refuse to participate in it. And I think that's hard, especially in a peer setting. But you never know who's around that they would look for you maybe in the future for help. If someone knows that you don't stand for these things and you take yourself out of that situation or you say, hey, this isn't okay, then they'll know those aren't things that they can joke around about you and they aren't really funny at all.
Mm-hmm. Kind of along those same lines, speaking up if you hear any comments that are blaming victims or excusing violence or anything like that, just even if it's not a joke, if it's just a comment that seems to kind of perpetuate something that's not super helpful, speaking up about that as well.
Mm-hmm. I think even you can start by having conversations in your life. Start talking about sexual violence, start talking about consent, start talking about healthy boundaries in relationships. I think opening up those doors for those conversations is really important.
Definitely. And, when we are not social distancing and we are out and about, if we're at public events or restaurants, bars, parties, things like that, just keeping an eye out for friends, for strangers, for the people in our lives, keeping an eye on them and noticing if we see something that maybe looks wrong or that seems like it's raising some red flags for us. Don't be afraid to, speak up or check in with those people or get help from someone else if the situation calls for it, but just don't be afraid to step in those ways, any ways that are safe for you.
Exactly. Well, awesome. We made it. Podcast number 2. We're at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Congratulations to us.
Yes. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, comments, please let us know. We are always here to answer those as well. We hope you took care of yourself. We hope if you need to take a break, you did. If you need to call and talk, you can.
Mm-hmm.
You can always reach out.
Yeah. Practice your favorite kind of self-care. I know that this is a heavy topic. So
go sit outside, go get some fresh air, wear your sunscreen, do whatever you need to do to kind of rejuvenate from this heavy talk.
yeah, definitely. Whatever makes you happy.
Well, awesome. Olivia, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for setting this up and getting us through podcast number 2.
Of course. Likewise. Thank you as well.
What are you going to do today?
Probably eat tacos.
Yes, Cinco de Mayo, eating
I
tacos.
know. Taco Tuesday also.
Yes, this has been training for this for a while.
Just waiting for these 2 days to fall on the same day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Have so much fun eating tacos. And
Thank you.
until next time.
Until next time, stay safe, be well,
Yes, and wash your hands.
and wash your hands.